if this recession hasn't told us what lifting people out of poverty in third and fourth world countries actually means with regard to subsistence and getting along, we do know that now. As in antebellum times, immediatism thus can transform our political vocabulary by linking the problem of slavery to related moral issues of extraordinary importance. Think about this, all of this as agenda for public history sites as you're going along here. Don't just listen to me. Try to think about how you might want to incorporate some of this in some of your thinking. And if you want to talk to me and help me to understand this better once this is over, I'm going to be hanging around for a long time. And I'd like to talk to people about what is going on here, what your reactions are. Second lesson the abolitionist can teach us also bears on commitment and suggests on where we can find its emotional sources today. What you've been worried about is I've been telling us how we ought to feel, but without telling us where we learn how to feel that way, right? I'm going to try and do that now. This lesson also helps us to understand why circumstances today might be favorable for launching a new abolitionist movement. Lesson is, immerse yourself in learning about slavery. Go out of your way to investigate firsthand, and above all, put highest value on what those who have been enslaved can teach you. During the age of Garrison, following such advice was easy. As noted, slavery back then was easy to see. In 1830, for example, the young Garrison spent several months in slave-ridden Baltimore learning all he could by living with black abolitionists who knew the institution firsthand. What he discovered had everything to do with shaping his career. To refresh his hatred of the institution, this guy did this several times a year. U.S. Congressman Joshua R. Giddings gritted his teeth and attended slave auctions, which were everyday occurrences in Washington, D.C. He'd roll out of bed, put on his coat and tie, grit his teeth, and say, time to go to a slave auction in order to be able to make myself hate slavery more. It's an extraordinary thing to do, but really not such an extraordinary thing to do. With these examples in mind, and they truly can be multiplied endlessly, it cannot be stressed enough how profoundly influential the African-American presence was in sustaining the commitments of white abolitionists. Blacks with whom Garrison resided and the slaves that Giddings observed forced them to gaze unobstructed on what they understood to be the slaveholders' transcendent crimes. Reminded of immediatist priest immediatism. Given their convictions, what choice did they have? White reformers suddenly began to see, and what stirred them so deeply was a consuming human empathy. And what I haven't been able to convince you of or even talk about yet is where the sources of that empathy would lie today. Right? So that's what I want to talk about now. For abolitionists, the enormous psychic distance that normally separated northern whites from the enslaved collapsed entirely, and you got an abolitionist movement. How might these lessons in empathy transfer to us? Again, this becomes a matter of, finally, of education, as you'll see in a minute. The place I've taught for more than 4 decades, Macalester College and a multitude of other small colleges resembling it, the nation's far-flung system of public universities and community colleges, I think, is a place where you'll find promising answers. And also for public historians, the next generation of people who will be staffing your institutions and visiting your sites. People who now are between the ages of 12 and 22. I've spent a great deal of time, now that I'm no longer teaching, talking to people like this who are so younger than me. That's the main reason I quit teaching is I couldn't understand young people any longer. And my children couldn't interpret them to me any longer. And I felt like everybody's, great uncle. And now that I'm no longer in a classroom, I can just learn more about how different and extraordinary, challenging this millennium generation is. And that's where I'm going with all this right now. The place that I taught for more than 4 decades offers some far-flung answers. I think you start with what's going to go to college. These are, in my opinion, the most likely places and people for building a grassroots abolitionist movement. In other words, constituencies that touch on your constituencies. There are ample precedents for this emphasis. Anybody who is a graduate of Oberlin College will tell you that college was founded by abolitionists who decided to commit their institution to the sin of slavery, to combating the sin of slavery, to opening their admissions policies to women and people of all colors, and who then fanned out around the countryside, changing everybody's mind about what the problem of slavery was. But what you don't know is that practically every small college of that day went through a debate about the problem of slavery. And I found out that happened at Williams, Dartmouth, Colgate, Princeton, Bowdoin, Western Reserve College, and Amherst, only to represent a few. Each of these colleges thereafter sustained an active anti-slavery society and had abolitionist faculty members. The point to be made about younger adults in higher education is this. Back then, in Oberlin's time, and historians have spent a lot of time trying to figure this out, abolitionism was really a revolt begun and led by the young and the educated. They were high-aspiring, intellectually restless, spiritually questing, and politically aware people, and they were responding to their own and to their parents' expectations to learn how they might make the world better by making a difference. They sought to define their callings by teaching, reading law, or studying for the ministry, and they plunged into any number of reform causes before finding their permanent answer to what they wanted to do in an abolitionist commitment. Young people. For all the differences between early Oberlin and college and university life today, I think a critical mass of our so-called millennial generation of students exhibit strikingly similar characteristics. They too are being challenged by their elders and, much more importantly, by themselves to make a difference. And the academic environments surrounding them encourage them to become involved in any one of a number of real-world problems. How many times have I heard in discussions just at this meeting the term service learning? And the whole idea of one way or another connecting the study of the academy somehow into some important formative element, generative element in education that involved public life. We get very strongly the idea that that's part of a buzz of what's here. It's certainly what's on my own campus, and I'm going to talk about it more in just a minute. Yes, unemployment anxieties make people want to major in economics and get high-paying jobs and so forth and so on. Nevertheless, I think there's persuasive evidence that says that there are more than a sufficient number of risk takers, many more, to launch an abolitionist movement off of these various campuses. Long ago, remember that the first abolitionists probably referred to themselves very accurately as a despised minority. You don't develop a social movement out of a consensus and a majority opinion. Okay, what evidence do I have to support these generalizations? May have time to do all this within the limit, let's see. Lots, actually. Today, and for the past 7 years, the number of applications for Teach for America and for AmeriCorps have jumped at least 10% annually. Isn't that extraordinary? And of course, the Obama administration wants to make that much, much bigger because, for a number of reasons having to do with his own campaign, this is payback for people who are already mobilized in one way or another, believing in change. Internships and volunteer coordination offices on campuses across the nation report ever greater participation in service, learning, and social justice internships for credit, and literally hundreds of thousands of uncompensated hours of volunteering, maybe millions of hours of uncompensated volunteering. The Chronicle of Higher Education, which tracks these trends statistically, described all this last year. It's, quote, the millennial generation's emphatic rejection of both the cynicism and materialism of the 90s and the confrontational style of the 60s and 70s. And across these campuses, students have organized virtually as often as face-to-face to create permanent inter-campus organizations. If you hang around on a small college campus, you'll notice very quickly. It just happens. What do? They've succeeded in pressuring administrators, regents, and boards of trustees to implement ecologically green policies on their campuses. And they involve themselves with controversial consequences of globalization through podcasting, text messaging against genocide, sweatshops, all kinds of other stuff.